Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, brothers and sisters and friends, and welcome to another episode of Sapient Voices, a podcast by Sapience Institute that aims to give platform to voices of wisdom and also wants to facilitate discussion in order for reason to prevail. My name is Hamza Andreas Tzortzis, and with me I have our very dear brother Abdullah Al-Andalusi. And before I let him talk, I'm going to basically give you a background concerning the brother, a little bit about who he is, because I think it's very important for everybody to be aware of his work and his websites and his courses. And we're going to be promoting all of that in the next few moments, because I really believe this brother is my teacher and he's an asset for the community. Alhamdulillah. May Allah preserve him and protect him. So Abdullah Al-Andalusi is an international speaker, thinker, and intellectual activist for Islam and Muslim affairs. He's an instructor and head of the Department of Occidentology at the Quran Institute and co-founder of the discussion forum, the Muslim Debate Initiative. He co-founded this in 2009, and it's a forum that promotes open dialogue and critical debate between thinkers, academics, politicians, and public speakers of all backgrounds. Abdullah's work involves explaining and demonstrating by rational argument the intellectual proofs for the Islamic belief system and promoting the Islamic way of life and Islamic solutions for contemporary problems. On a personal note, Abdullah takes Islamic opinions from the classical Sunni schools of thought. He is a revert to Islam, and he has spoken in many community centers, universities all around the world, colleges, and has appeared numerous occasions on various programs, TV, radio, including BBC, ITV, BBC Arabic, BBC Radio, Al Jazeera, and much more. He has also engaged in a number of debates with atheists, secularists, agnostics, liberals, and Christians on a variety of topics from theology to political philosophy. And I have never seen our beloved brother Abdullah Al-Andalusi ever lose a debate or a discussion. And I don't only mean that intellectually, but also mean that with his manners and with his approach to these discussions. He is what you would call a Muslim gentleman, alhamdulillah. So, Brother Abdullah, jazakallah for coming on board.
Barakallah feek. I was going to say maybe you haven't seen enough of them. Then you said that, but yeah, I'll take that. I'll take that compliment. Barakallah feekum. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. To watch this and yourself, brother, and barakallah feek for having me on for this discussion. I was very interested to talk about this because obviously this is something concerning a passion of mine, which is political philosophy and debating political philosophy, and I have done debates on this topic, and I mentioned you before, and I'm going to embarrass you again, which is one of the many inspirations I think for many of the du'at who do engage in political philosophy was you were one of the first pioneers that actually engaged political philosophy in Western political philosophy in the UK. You debated on secular liberalism. I know previously people talk about capitalism, the economic system, but you actually said, let's grab the bull by the horns and talk about the actual aqidah and the central basis of it, debating a liberal academic. And I think that has inspired many du'at ever since to be more confident and to go out there and to engage with this topic, because it informs more of the way of life currently around the world than discussions on things like, let's say, Christianity, for example, which is ever diminishing in its influence. So so barakallah feekum for that, and again, thank you for inviting me again on to talk about this one of my passions.
Yeah, jazakallah, bro. I mean, it's a very important topic, and the reason it's important because not only does it have a huge influence in the public and social square, but also a lot of people who seem to adopt the Islamic worldview or internalize the Islamic worldview and understand and believe in the Islamic worldview, they're starting to adopt some of these false alien ideologies, which may be based on incoherent epistemic and metaphysical assumptions. And the other reason is very important, and this is personal to me, is that many of the people who try to share Islam academically and intellectually, which is one of the main, goals of Sapience Institute, is that we don't even know much about this. Like, if you were to ask me to write an essay on postmodernism from my memory, or an essay on critical race theory, I would have no clue. And this is coming from someone who has an academic background in philosophy. I just don't, it's not my area, right? So I'm going to be treating this as a teacher-student scenario, bro. And I'm not saying it out of kind of humility, out of genuine passion, because I want to know about this. I want to go out there as well in the front line with yourself and join arms, if you like, and basically say, look, you know, we don't want to be aggressive, or we're not against anyone from that perspective, but we're going to be positively assertive by showing that your ideas are incoherent and they're based on falsity. I want to do that too. But at the moment, you know, I have to, as you know, the Chinese say, empty your teacup, right? And I have to now just become a learner. So what we're going to be discussing, which I've probably alluded to it right now, brothers and sisters, is we're going to be discussing postmodernism and related concepts. What is postmodernism? What is critical race theory? How do we address these ideas? And how do we use it in the context of sharing and defending Islam academically and intellectually? So from the perspective of a learner, bro, I think the first question we want you to answer is, what is the difference between modernism and postmodernism?
Okay. So first and foremost, don't beat yourself up about it too much concerning these are left-wing ideas. And I'll mention specifically what I mean with reference to that, because I know postmodernism is actually a very broad term, and it refers to both artistic movements as well as a huge sway of different philosophical and ethical standpoints, you could say. But the issue is that, I mean, I think what you've dealt with mostly in the past is the political philosophy that has the hegemony over the current world. A Greek word, is it hegemonia? I think hegemonia, is that the Greek pronunciation? The hegemony of which I think comes from the term, I think mean king or whatever you. The sovereign ideology is liberalism, secular liberalism. And that is by far the ruling ideology in the West, and also in other countries which the West has colonized and spread its ideologies to. And many Muslims have succumbed to that ideology currently because it's the dominant ideology. And so they've even sometimes subconsciously succumbed to many of the ideas and values in that ideology and its assumptions and presumptions. So that's the dominant one. So we're not really talking about and ideologies which are the most dominant currently, or at least politically the most dominant, but we are talking about ones which are a kind of sister movement to, I was going to say, the dark side of Western Enlightenment, but arguably it's all the dark side. So there's the dark and the darker side, I suppose. And there's these two competing forces in Western Enlightenment that have been there since the outset. And this is one of the competing forces, which has now manifested in what you might call as postmodernist movement. So to answer your question, kind of more, specifically, so the question is really, what do we mean by modernism? And you've encountered many of the kind of effects on symptoms of modernism itself. So modernism was basically a term, it usually applies to artistic movements from the turn of the 19th century to mid 20th century, but it is also used as a catch-all for the various ideas that kind of came out of the West post-Enlightenment. So one of them is that there's the rejection of religion and God as being the centrality of epistemology or of morals, of ethics, and also out of investigating the world. So it's no longer a God-centered or God-centric universe upon which investigations will be made. It'd be a more human-centric. And so from that, the second kind of point of modernism is that man, collectively speaking, is the measure of all things, is the universal measure of all things. So now all things will be measured by its utility and its perspective to human beings, not not relative to a higher being or power. Thirdly, you could say modernism holds the belief that the world is objective. Obviously, it can be objectively understood outside of the mind. We can all agree on it. It's universally outside. There's something there that we can all observe. We can have a relative have relative trust and fidelity in our observations of it, and we can mutually agree. And more importantly, that it can be accurately represented through words, through mathematical models, and even through art as well, which I'll get into some examples of that as a modernist phrase. Now, you might say, again, is that a bad thing to believe that there's an objective reality outside ourselves and that we can understand it through words and through mathematical models? No, but when that is mixed with the idea that humans are the foundation of measuring reality, and that reality itself is not founded upon anything else necessarily, which you might call a type of naturalism or physicalism, then it becomes more insidious. Another point would be public morality. So the idea that public morality is collectively decidable through human reason, which is the whole basis for the Enlightenment. So the Enlightenment is the discovery of materialist political philosophies, ethics, which can be deduced from purely from human reason, and with only reference to human reason, vis-a-vis this objective reality, this objective world that we can observe. Lastly, the idea that the laws of the universe also operate on human beings, and so just like you might observe evolution in the universe, they might say, so things change over time, and you get viruses pick up mutations, and so it's microevolution, things like this. This idea of change and progress, a narrative of progress, would also apply to human beings. So humans are on this inevitable journey to a great, wonderful future of progress, is an inevitable outcome of a sophisticated and happy and glorious future brought on by progress, by the progress of the human mind, and then that manifesting itself in technology and industry. And of course, the last, you could say, foundational principle of modernism, what is new is better. So what is always new is better. Now, some of this stuff you might think, well, it's not too far away from the Islamic perspective, where we think that, yeah, you can model the world on words and mathematical models and so on and so forth. Yes, that's true. But the other things are very what you might call, what's materialistic, based on physicalist assumptions, based on metaphysical naturalism, as it might always is called. And in the art, because art is really just an expression of culture. So this is a cultural phenomenon, this is a philosophical phenomenon, and it has its corresponding expression in art. Now, there is a variety of movements which are all part of the modernist modernist movements. You call the modernism, the modernist mindset, or mindset. So you have up until the 19th century the idea of realism. So they wanted to make pictures photorealistic almost, to actually capture exactly what we're observing. But then this actually then changed towards the end. Now, I know realism might not be considered to be modernist, although I consider it to be a modernist itself, because one of the drives of realism was to create photorealistic, almost pictures of the observer world, because this was before cameras were invented, of course, so people wanted to represent reality accurately as possible. But then you had others who thought we can improve on this, because not everything is captured in a painting. And so you had the rise of the cubists, who thought that, look, an image or any object can be appreciated from different angles and perspectives, but you've got a two-dimensional canvas. How do you solve this problem? And so what cubists endeavored to do was to present multiple parts of the object at the same time on a two-dimensional canvas, which is why you get these if you see cubist paintings, they look a bit strange, obviously, to us, because they're not meant to be photorealistic, but they present different sides of the object simultaneously on a two-dimensional canvas. That was the perspective. They wanted to capture, they thought we could maybe improve representation of reality by capturing more of it more accurately, by different viewpoints of the object, all captured from the same perspective. Expressionists looked at the object and the emotions it evokes. They want to discuss the object and how it can actually convey the emotions, not just rely on the observer of the painting to react emotionally to an image, but rather that they think, well, maybe this object evokes a certain response. So, the famous, for example, painting, the Scream painting, the one that someone on the boat holding, screaming, that famous Scream, I don't know if you know what I'm referring to, would be an expressionist type of painting. So they thought that we wanted to capture that aspect of reality, which is also the emotion that it evokes. But you also had impressionists who wanted to capture, for example, objects and how they are dynamically changing in through colors and light. So, for example, you might be looking at, let's say, a tree in the middle of a field, and it has a certain glimmer to it from the reflection of the sun at a certain position in the sky. And then, of course, as the sun changes or the wind blows, it will change slightly to reflect the different position of the sun or the wind blowing through it, or so on. So the Impressionists really wanted to capture these kind of objects, the light, the change of light, the change of colors that is involved in it over time, in a way incorporating time as well as space into their picture. So these are what they were trying to do. Futurism tried to capture more dynamic movements. So they draw a picture of a dog and the legs just flapping like a blur to encompass movement, more dynamic movement. So that was basically, in a nutshell, that's what modernism was. Now, postmodernism is the next step, you could say, taking this to the next step through the simple realization of some things, which is, I know as Muslims, we usually have debates with atheists, and you've had debates with atheists, loads of debates with atheists I've seen, where you discuss about morality. What is the basis for morality? What is the, as you put it, an objective, conceptual anchor for morality, for the idea of good and bad? It would be subjective. It would be according to whoever's whims or desires if it's not based on something outside ourselves. But then the universe obviously you can't find good and bad in a microscope or a telescope. So if you don't believe in God, the argument goes, then morality is just fluid. There is no inherent good and bad in anything per se. So the postmodernists took this consequence of removing God from the equation to the next degree, which is that humans believing that there is something called objective truth, even in both language and the external world, is also an illusion imposed by a false consciousness, right? So they just took that to the next step. I mean, I suppose Nietzsche was sometimes taken as the epitome of elucidating that perspective. But I'll give you the kind of the points of postmodernism, and you can compare it to modernism. So postmodernism moves away from the belief that man collectively is the universal measure of all things, and to the individual is the measure of all things, right? Because there's multiple individuals, and they all have their own different measures of all things, and each of these individual measures is just as valid as any other. So some people say a type of relativism, but the funny thing with Nietzsche was Nietzsche didn't believe that all perspectives were equal. He thought his perspective was better than anybody else's, right? He'd say that, that he doesn't really give any value to anyone. They're other people's perspective. He doesn't care about that. He cares about his perspective. So it's called perspectivism, which is the name for that particular, maybe a subtype of relativism. So the individual now is the measure of all things, not societies. The next kind of point of postmodernism is that belief that the belief that the world is subjective to the observer, to any observer, and cannot objectively and accurately be represented through words, mathematical models, or art. Now, it doesn't mean there's no external world to humans. That's not what postmodernists say, and that's a common misconception. They simply say that you cannot interpret it with a definitive, objective, accurate, universal interpretation that applies to anybody else. Whatever interpretation of the universe you have, that's yours. They would say that the universe is, or the external world has infinite interpretations. That's what they'll say. And likewise, most postmodernist thinkers would say that even language and texts can have close to infinite interpretations. It doesn't matter what the author even intended. What matters is how you engage with the text, what it means to you, how you want to use any text you read. We can discuss that a bit more about where they got that thinking from, but that's just to summarize. Another point is they will say that public morality is not collectively decidable by society, but is individually decidable, and not through reason, because you can't trust reason, because reason doesn't give you 100% accurate understanding of reality itself. So how can you use it to decide morality? Instead, they say simply that your morality, the morality you engage or you use in public, is individually decidable through human feeling and desire. Right? So that's the ultimate source of every individual's morality, whether they're in the public space or in the private space too, actually. Third to lastly, the laws of the universe, they would say it's chaotic, right? Yeah, you might say there are laws of the universe. You could deduce that if you'd like to say, they'd say it, but the universe is chaos. And human behavior is likewise chaos. And so they reject meta-narratives. They reject ideology or historicism, which was a very famous socialist or Marxist view about a historical narrative. Even liberals who believe, and they call it the Whiggish concept of history, early liberals who believed there was this inevitable progress towards liberalism and freedom and happiness and joy, they reject all that. There is no law you can derive about human history and human nature. And of course, likewise, they will also reject that humans have a discernible fixed nature, a fitra. They would reject that. They would say that's why they're called anti-essentialists. Whereas the modernists believe that humans did have nature, and you could observe it and deduce it by observation, scientific observation, whatever that means with regards to that. But postmodernists they're anti-essentialists. They don't think there is any inherent nature in human beings. They don't believe that progress must necessarily occur, and they certainly don't believe that what is new is necessarily better. And they point to the excesses of World War II, concentration camps, Stalin, all those things they point to, and they say that at the nuclear bomb, they point to all those examples and they say, look at those examples. Doesn't that show you that the future can be terrifying, can be worse? In fact, they say that the Enlightenment has actually failed to deliver happiness to humans. We're actually more controlled, more surveilled, more oppressed, more suppressed, more depressed than ever before. That will be their argument. And so anyone who has gripes with liberalism or the liberal dominant ideology will tend to gravitate towards this the little sister of the liberal stream of the Enlightenment, because deeming it to be the only way to address the problems in the modern world, because this seems like to be a critique of the modern world created by liberalism and other modernist ideologies. And so anyway, in a nutshell, that's modernism, postmodernism. But in art, postmodernism kind of highlights surrealism. So for example, the very famous art piece, it was in French, where there's a pipe and it said underneath, "This is not a pipe." I don't know if you know that one. It's quite famous. That would be the kind of artwork they produce, and there's a reason they produce that kind of artwork. They want to show you that representations of art are not real life. They're not reality, and you should realize that they're just simulations of reality. They're a false illusion that's cast over your eyes. Pop art, very postmodernist, where they show you that basically that what you call art today is a mishmash of just previous cultural products in the past, and there's nothing really new anymore. There's reasons why they say all these arguments, but I'm just kind of summarizing, giving some examples. So postmodernism is not about trying to represent reality anymore. It's really about the human desires and whims, and the expression of those desires and whims, and the equality of all human individuals in their own morality, their own interpretation of reality, and the undecidability of anyone to anything that approaches an objective interpretation of reality. So anyway, that's in a nutshell.
Whoa. There's a lot there. Well, the first thing that comes to my mind from a learning perspective is postmodernism seems to be a kind of metaphysical lens or justification to justify shahawat, blameworthy desires, bro. like I know this sounds quite crude, but just from a kind of Islamic spiritual perspective, is like there's a bunch of thinkers that have probably just thought about how do we justify, the kind of bestial, lowly desires that we have to manifest themselves in any way that they want without feeling guilty. That's what it sounds like to me. We don't live in a moral universe. I mean, you mentioned Nietzsche. Nietzsche, for me, was quite prophetic. I don't mean that in a Islamic or religious or theological context. I mean it that he had an insight. And when he said God is dead, obviously people misquote him. He didn't really mean it from a kind of ontological perspective. He meant God is dead in the hearts of human beings. And he realized that we would have to now become the source of our own morality. And then he realized each person's going to be their own God, if you like. And then he kind of raised this kind of philosophical question or moral question. I have my values, where are yours? And that is exactly where postmodernism lies, I think, because now the individual becomes sovereign to that degree. The individual is like the basis for everything. I decide that I'm going to be one of these 16 genders, then that's my truth, right? And the whole of society has to support that. And at the same time, whole of society has to support maybe someone else who has a truth that is counter to that. And there you get the chaos, right? Now, the point that I want to raise just very quickly before we continue with the next main question that I had is, what about this whole thing about hierarchy? Because where do the kind of discussions concerning hierarchy start with regards to postmodernism? Now, I'm getting the idea now just from what you've just said that, well, hierarchy is like a manifestation of truth, isn't it? Like there must be this type of moral priority or social hierarchy, and there is a truth behind that because it leads to societal harmony, it leads to progress, it leads to all of these things, or it's worked in the past. And all of these utterances are too objective, and there's too much truth in there. And they're thinking, no, you have to remove all of that because all of that is just based upon your own context, your own social, historical, literary, linguistic norms that are not based on any objective truth anyway. And your notion of hierarchy, your notion of even moral hierarchies and these things really are not representations of reality. So we should remove them in order for the individual to manifest the shahawat and the desires. Am I getting it right there?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, it's so you're correct. Some people call Nietzsche the prophet of postmodernism. He was obviously one of the existentialists who argued that in the absence of God in the Western, the new Western paradigm or mindset, zeitgeist, to use a Hegelian term, that morality now can only be decided by the individual. And in fact, the individual should have the moral courage to decide their own morality, to be an Übermensch, to be more than human, and yes. But he didn't believe, by the way, that all human beings could do that. He only thought only the strongest could do that.
So might is right.
Indeed, he said that basically truth is the will to power, is to impose yourself onto the world, and so what you deem to be true, or rather what you say to be true anyway, is really just coming from the place of your will to impose yourself upon the external world, to imprint yourself, externalize yourself in the external world, and self-realize in the external world, which goes back to Hegelian philosophy.
Sure. So you mentioned Nietzsche was one of the existentialists, and obviously existentialism it's a broad kind of philosophical approach. But is there a link between existentialism and postmodernism?
Oh, very much so. Oh, very, very much so. They are the precursors, and in fact have guided the trajectory of what would then be now be called postmodernism.
In what way?
Okay, so in the modernist perspective, like humans have essence. So there's something about you have a nature that's essentially yourself, your instincts, your biological needs, your genetics, a whole number of things. You have an essence of what is you. and that is a fixed essence. You can't change that essence, no matter, even if you cut off a finger or a foot or what have you, you're still going to be human, and you'll be human while you're still alive, of course. And then when you die, obviously, then you will be a non-living human. And everything in the universe obviously has an essence to it, which should be studied by physics and chemistry and biology and so on and so forth, which is in essentially the modernist, which was the modernist accepted viewpoint. So the existentialists, and why they're called existentialists, is they came up with the argument, and it was mostly about humans. They said that basically that before you have essence, you must exist, right? Existence is more primary, more foundational than having essence. And so, as the famous phrase goes, existence precedes essence. And if existence precedes essence, then there's nothing that you are beholden to. There's no fixed nature that you have as a human individual that you have to stick to, or that you must do, or that you should do. You can decide your essence, in essence, is what they are saying. You can decide your essence, and therefore you can decide your nature, and you can then become anything you want, quote unquote. So that's what is existentialism. And Nietzsche, who then argued that truth is an anthropomorphism of the universe. There is no truth to the universe.
Wow.
There's simply he tried his fellow atheists, saying there's one, like you say, God is an anthropomorphism. There's one more anthropomorphism you haven't got rid of just yet, and you need to get rid of it, which is truth itself. To expect that you could actually have any kind of approximation to truth or understand what it is in itself. He challenged, and this you probably know that this is influenced by the Kant's argument of noumena, right? There's something beyond what you can sense in the universe that is the things in of themselves, what they actually are, but you'll never be able to really interact with that. You never be able, all you can see is phenomena, not noumena. What is behind the object.
Now, I would even argue from that point of view that really, when you remove God, as you rightly said, when you talked about, man is the center of the universe or the individual, and it's not God-centric anymore, this kind of pursuit for freedom or absolute freedom, now many of these kind of neoliberals talk about, that they, it's all about freedom, right? And they've made freedom, or their goal is this kind of absolute type of freedom. And for me, and this echoes what Martin Ling said, that is really the desire for Allah. That's the fitrah, the nature, yearning for God, because absolute freedom is a part of divinity. No one can be absolutely free. Only Allah is absolutely free. He's al-Ghani. He is the absolutely free. He is as-Samad. He is the independent. So all of these philosophies, in particular, what's happening with maybe existentialism, even with liberalism today, this kind of pursuit for this ideal, for this, de-shackling, this absolute freedom, really, that's just the desire for Allah. And it's only when Islam comes, when they adopt Islam and they believe in Islam and they internalize Islam, that they will find true freedom. But what type of freedom? Enslavement to Allah, because it would free you from the shackles of everything else, because the ruh, the soul desires Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which is very interesting, because the Quran in chapter 39 verse 29, and I'm summarizing the verse, basically says that consider the situation of two people. One man is a servant to many masters and they're all quarreling, and one man is a servant to one master. Whose condition is best? So, you're always in a state of slavery, if you like, or servitude, or we're all contingent. We're all going to be dependent on something, physically, ontologically, existentially, if you like, and otherwise. But the true freedom lies in connecting yourself with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So I wanted to add that in there, because I don't think maybe the existentialists meant for this to happen. I don't know, maybe they did. I don't know what you feel. I don't think they meant to destroy morals, hierarchy, and all of that stuff. I think for them, it was a lot to do with, about the human condition. What do you think? I could be wrong. I'm just musing here.
I mean, Soren Kierkegaard and perhaps Heidegger didn't perhaps intend for that full consequence to arrive. But Nietzsche certainly did, and certainly vehemently called for it, for humans to, in essence, become gods themselves, become a pantheon.
Sure.
Now, I mean, I want to give some context because I don't want anyone to think that all this began with postmodernists or with existentialists. And so, no, it didn't. It was entailed in the very ideas of the Enlightenment themselves. This is just one branch of it, taking it to the nth degree, to its natural conclusion, if you take that as a starting assumption. So, as you're aware, you had Descartes and you had John Locke, who, in essence, kind of, you could say, set the basis for individualism. Although John Locke argued that humans own themselves, we are the absolute sovereign of ourselves on Earth. Our natural state is to own ourselves. Of course, Jacques Rousseau also took that our natural state, the natural law for humans, is that we're meant to be individuals and absolute authority over ourselves and our bodies. Of course, John Locke said ourselves and our possessions, something that Rousseau didn't agree with, because he thought that possessions belongs to the whole earth, to everybody, which was the beginning of the split, which would never be the socialists and the liberals. That's kind of the beginning times. But you also had obviously Descartes, who argued that the basis of all knowledge starts with the mind, not with the empirical observation of the outside world, that starts in the mind, right? So that's where your basis of all your knowledge is. And from that, you get Francois Poulain de la Barre, who was a social Cartesian, which is an interesting concept in and of itself, who argued that he was actually one of the first to argue that men and women are equal and should be equal because mind has no sex. The mind is separate from the body. The mind-body, dualism. And I know you've done quite a bit of research and study, I think, and work on the mind-body problem and neurology, and discussing that with atheists and so on and so forth. Hard problem of consciousness and things like that. So and as you know, so Descartes was saying this, and of course Francois de la Barre argued that the body of the woman doesn't really impact the mind. The mind is beyond the body in a way, and so the mind has no sex. Now, the empiricists, as you know, that time, like John Locke and many others who were the empiricists branch of the Enlightenment, actually thought women were inferior intellectually to men, based on, well, it's not even pseudoscience. They just basically saw that women weren't as educated as men. And so they thought, well, women must be intellectually inferior, even though their society didn't actually give women the same education as men, necessarily speaking, or at least, well, I don't think there was the public education available at the time even then. But anyway, so that's what led to that kind of split. Now, what happens is that when you take the idea that humans are a mind, and the mind has no essence, and the mind transcends the body, and then obviously you take it via Kant, via Hegel, going towards in that stream of thinking, and of course Nietzsche becomes influenced by what is basically continental philosophy, the whole, as you know, the European take on the kind of the European traditional philosophy from Descartes, which is more mind first. So then Nietzsche just says, look, the mind has omnipotent abilities in a way, in that it can engage reality in its own terms, which is ridiculous, but his argument is such, and therefore it transcends observable reality. It transcends it, and it can shape the interpretation of reality, at least, and that it is in the nature of the mind and the human being generally to be to impose itself on reality itself. So I'll just give you a quote. So there's a writing of his called Beyond Good and Evil, and he says, even the body within each individual treats each other as equals, will have to be an incarnate will to power. It will strive to grow, spread, seize, become predominant, not from any morality or immortality, but because it is living, and because life simply is the will to power. Another phrase from a writing called The Will to Power, he said, do you want a name for this world, a solution for all its riddles, a light for you too, you best concealed, strongest, most intrepid, most midnightly men? This world is the will to power and nothing besides, and you yourselves are also this will to power and nothing besides. So this is where you get this, the idea that the only way human beings can truly be individuals, truly be sovereign over themselves, is they're sovereign over the very truths and morality that they subject themselves to.
Okay, so all of this
freedom.
Sure. So all of this modernism, post-modernism stuff, how do we see it from an Islamic perspective? The first question I want to ask is, well, is it Islamic? Can we use the modernist or the post-modernist lenses to understand reality and engage in dawah, engage with human beings, or even engage in academic work? I mean, what are the problems? What are the limitations? That should we even approach it at all? What are the terms of engagement, bro, intellectually here?
Well, I mean, the famous verse in the Quran, have you seen those who make their own desires their lords, right? So they make themselves into God. They make themselves their desires into lords, and it's a tyrant, right? Their desires and whims are tyrants. The heart is a tyrant. Qalb, as you know, is comes from the word to mean like a sea, or it changes, right?
It wavers. It does taqallub, so it's always wavering and changing, for sure.
Yeah, and so therefore, you can't control it. You don't control your desires. People don't control their desires. But if they were to be told that they themselves are divine beings, so to speak, such that they determine their own morality, their own truth, they can be happy once they've fully freed themselves from the shackles of anything imposed by society, they will be miserable. Why? Because they still can't control their desire. They don't decide what is their happiness. They can't flick a switch and make themselves happy, make themselves content. They're not self-sufficient, right? And that's the problem. Well, that's one of the main problems, aside from the fact that they are also created beings which are showing immense ingratitude to the one who does sustain them and who is the only self-sufficient one. But the Enlightenment has inculcated the idea of individualism, the idea that the individual is the most sovereign, most important concern. And liberals believe that too, but these existentialists, in a way, have turned it into a spirituality of sorts, and have taken it to that maximum possible extent. And that's one of the problems. It's the ingratitude. Yes. There was also a verse in the Quran that said about a person who rejects the truth. It said, have you not seen this? The one who thinks themselves self-sufficient, right?
Yes.
See, so that's individualism in a way, that people think they're self-sufficient, but you're not. You depend on your parents, you depend on society to teach you language, even though you say it's not, should have no authority over you, but yet you can't even begin to make cognitive categories and think and actually rationalize without language being taught to you. Your genes were supplied to you, your sustenance was supplied to you, the clothes are mostly supplied to you, unless you weave your own clothes from the forest or what have you. Most things are supplied to you, and you depend on it, right? And
yes,
and likewise, if the wheat shipment from Ukraine doesn't come soon, a lot of people will soon face the reality of how dependent they are on things outside themselves, and that's that's the
this is
of humans.
Yeah, this is a challenge against the idea of like individualism. Like you see yourself as almost the individual has primacy, and not only that, you think you have this kind of sense of sovereignty from that perspective, that you become your own master or you're your own king. And the Quran has an amazing way of just dealing with this kind of full sense of self-sufficiency and individualism. You know, Allah reminds us that we're going to die. Allah talks about in the 22nd chapter the whole life cycle of the human being. Like, consider when we're born. We didn't give birth to ourselves, for God's sake, right? And if we were born and someone just left us alone for 2 weeks with no food or no milk, we would die. We would die. And our own very birth and our own existence, for at least the first few months or years, is solely dependent on things outside of the individual. And those things that were helping the baby to grow and be nourished, or those people, namely the mother and others in many cases, required other things to be dependent upon. For example, the hospital system, the education system, to actually allow us to have doctors and so on and so forth. And all of those things are ultimately dependent on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So even this idea, when people think sometimes especially the neoliberals, like as if they were born, you know, they came out of the mother's womb with a briefcase and a tie and a bank balance, right? This is ridiculous. And there's an interesting correlation between affluence and atheism, by the way. And it's not that rich people are atheists per se because of their richness, but because affluence has an ability, or it can be a key to open the door to this kind of existential spiritual disease of the false sense of self-sufficiency. You know, I'm self-sufficient. It's me. I did it. But we have to realize that even our very ideas, bro, come from, you know, social dependencies. Like for us to even take language itself. How is it the case that I can pronounce your name as Abdullah Al-Andalusi? Why do I not pronounce your name as Abdullah? Why don't I pronounce it that way? One of the main reasons, maybe that name is not a great example. Let's take love, right? Why do we pronounce love as love and not love or love-e? The reason being is because it's a lived, it's a living knowledge coming down to us through this concept of recurrent reporting. In the Islamic tradition, we have mutawatir, because there was no book that taught us on how to pronounce love. Yes, we have books now that tell us, dictionaries, this is how you pronounce these words, but they're just a reflection of the social living knowledge that has come down to us over time. So even very pronunciation, even meaning itself, is not based on just one person. It's based on this kind of collective sharing and transmitting of knowledge. And this is just language itself. Imagine all the other things that we believe in or we hold to be true. So yeah, you're right. But that deals with the question of, you know, giving the individual primacy, the individualism aspect. What about the kind of other aspects concerning postmodernism? Because in the academy, if you like, in academia, there are many Muslims that seem to be maybe taking hold of these ideas and appreciating them. And, you know, if you could give us a bunch of points to show where exactly postmodernism is at clash with Islam.
Sure. You're talking about society generally agreeing, for the most part, pronunciation rules, basic ones anyway.
Yes.
And that's something that people take in. You should hear what a kind of a branch of postmodernism called post-structuralism, which deals with texts. What they say about this. They say it is completely arbitrary and should, in essence, has no authority over us. Before I answer your question, I just wanted to kind of note something else quite interesting, which is, so the kind of initial individualism of the Enlightenment that liberalism encapsulates is this freedom from state tyranny. In essence, freedom from the state, at least from oppression by the state.
Mm-hmm.
But people didn't want to stop there. It was, what about oppression from society and repression from religion? These external forces. And so, for example, France modeled itself more against protecting the individual from oppression by religion, and not by people like Spanish inquisitors going around and burning people at the stake. No. By just simply peer pressure from of religiously influenced aspects of culture. And so when French made laws to try to ban the hijab in schools and ban the niqab in public, they cited that they were simply protecting the individual from religion, freedom from religion, in order for them, even if that means that there'll be people who have to be compelled to take off the niqab in public and remove the hijab in schools. They say ultimately it's for their freedom as individuals from this external force, religion, and also from society can oppress in many ways. Obviously, as you know, John Stuart Mill, when he was trying to talk about protecting the individual's right to freedom of expression, he said that society can impose certain repression which is worse than the state. Because at least with the state, if you know that the police can't hear you and you want to say whatever you want to say, you can at least say it. But if culture is oppressing you, then you're scared to say what you really feel and think, even in your own private areas of your life, in your house or to your friends or what have you. But this had the opposite effect. Just John Stuart Mill's argument had the opposite effect, because then people said, yes, we must go out and ensure that everyone has the freedom to express themselves as they want. And if someone wants to, let's say, express themselves publicly by engaging in a romantic act of kissing a same-sex partner, if someone was to say on the street, like there was a Christian preacher in England who was just preaching out, he said homosexuality is a sin. He had a banner or something, or lesbianism is a sin. He got arrested and fined for obviously a hate crime, because he said that simply expressing that is impinging the freedom of individuals to express themselves in the way they want as in sexuality. So which creates a contradiction, because that means that you can't express your moral views or your religious views in order to cater for other people's right to express themselves, going out in public and, let's say, and in identifying or at least acting with romantic gestures of same-sex gestures, even though expressing doesn't stop those people from doing it. Simply saying homosexuality is a sin doesn't physically stop anyone, but they say it creates a social oppression, and in order to protect them, their right not to be socially oppressed, the people who are expressing this idea must be socially oppressed, or no, legally oppressed by the state. It creates so many contradictions in their system, which I don't want to, I can enumerate so many times. Anyway, to take it back now, and before I do, one other observation about something you said before, which is you mentioned how we are so dependent on many things going right. I saw this great quote online. Wish I had thought of it, but it didn't come from me. They said that you're only 4 or 5 minutes away from dying by asphyxiation, because like not being able to, but dying through lack of oxygen. But every breath you reset it.
Wow!
Right? You reset that timer. Right?
Wow!
So I wish I thought of it. It's a really great observation. But anyway. So to go back to your question, then, so what are the other aspects of postmodernism which has kind of infiltrated academia and infiltrated the minds of many, unfortunately, Muslims who are entangled in?
And why is it un-Islamic? Why would we say this is contrary to the Islamic worldview?
Okay, so I'm going to summarize, but you can feel free to drill down in any claims I've made, and I can give you examples and things also. But I feel that you and the audience would benefit from, I mean, you might already know this already, but the audience at the very least would benefit from just a little bit of history to see where all this comes from and where the problem arises. So basically, as you know, the famous philosopher Hegel developed the ideas of a kind of zeitgeist, of the ideas of like a Weltanschauung worldview, zeitgeist, the spirit of the age, the thesis and antithesis as two conflicting forces that produce they clash and they produce sublation. This was all his idea. Karl Marx came along. So it was because Hegel was an idealist. It's all about the mind, about it's almost very woolly and very non-physical. So Karl Marx was a physicalist, very much a materialist. He transformed that into a materialist form, and he basically said, okay, history is a clash of conflicting, of two conflicting forces producing synthesis. He argued that there's a war between not necessarily a war, but a clash or a suppression of the working class by the ruling classes, the bourgeoisie, the rich, or those who own the means of production. And the ideal is to basically liberate the workers by, in essence, equalizing the ownership of the means of production to everybody. It becomes common property of everybody. But he also argued that that was the way to liberate individuals, because if you didn't have to worry about doing a particular job to make ends meet, then you're free. But if you have to spend your 9 to 5 or 9 to 6 or even more than that, worrying and working and at the behest of someone else who uses your labor and makes a lot of profit from your labor, you're not free. Yeah, you're a wage slave, basically. That's, in essence, was his argument. He made a whole bunch of other arguments. I'm trying to summarize it as best as I can and so on. Anyway, why is this even relevant in the first place? Why is the Marxist perspective even relevant? Well, he said he said that he made this idea up, which is basically, he said that he's a materialist worldview. He said everything comes from the means of production, right? He says that how you make your computers, you make your cars, how the early people who like cut down wood and make wooden cabins and wooden houses and things, using the axe or the plow. He said that the first thing that humans need to do is to survive, and they survive by obviously agriculture, by cutting things down in industry. Culture comes later, and therefore he says that culture comes from the means of production and making something called a superstructure, or the ideology of the state. And he argued, in essence, that the ideology of the state is what justifies those in power retaining their power, is the ideology, which is the culture, the values, the worldview of the entire state system. So he said eventually there would be the means of production will change and evolve to the new inventions, new industries, and people will see the possibility of communism, the possibility that you don't have to work that much to actually be happy, to have all the food you want, all the house you want, the car, whatever you want. You can actually, if you just overturn the bourgeois, make a one-class society, and change all that, and so on and so forth. That'll be then everyone will be free, because their material needs will not be at the behest of the bourgeois who control the wealth, and make people dependent on wages and fixed routine jobs that are soulless and are soul destroying, and so on and so forth. Monotonous jobs and things like that. I'm heavily summarizing it just to keep it brief. So why is this important? Why? Because Karl Marx predicted that, in his view of history, that there's this eventual evolution to the point where you had feudalism, and then you had capitalism, and the next stage was communism, or socialism, then communism, where the state would own all the means of production and then distribute that equally, and then eventually the state would wither away, and you'd have a pure utopian anarchy where everyone owns the means of production. You won't need a state. That was basically Karl Marx's view. He predicted that England, the most industrialized societies, would be the first to fall to socialism and then communism. That was his prediction. And guess what? It didn't happen. Only the most backwater countries at the time, or backward countries relatively speaking, Russia and all such countries, they're the ones that fell, but not the ones he predicted would follow. This made Marxists think to themselves, why did that not work out? What's going on? And then they started to revise Karl Marx's predictions and his beliefs, and they said, what's going on? Why aren't the workers rising up and like, why wouldn't they be socialists? It's for their own benefit. They should love this. Why is it not happening in the most advanced capitalist societies? And they came to the conclusion, and this is where you have neo-Marxists now, that the people are being controlled ideologically by the ruling class. The ruling class, through cultural hegemony, which is developed by Gramsci, but anyway, and other new neo-Marxists develop these ideas. They've been told these ideas that are false ideas, false consciousness in a way, and they keep people content and happy in the oppressed lives that they're living as exploited workers. And they're even being told that that's the natural way of, this is how it's naturally meant to be. So they just think it's natural. They think it's normal. They don't rise up. Why is that now important? It's because now the fixation was there's a ruling class, a ruling elite, and they control the culture of the society. And this culture is what fools the working classes, fools the people into subservience. So then the solution to this is we have to critique, as they call it, Ideological, it's a German term. I'm not pronouncing it with a German accent, but we have to refute it. We have to engage it. And as this school of thought develops, it encounters existentialist ideas, and then eventually morphs into what you now call postmodernism, where they say that the problem is we have to defeat hierarchy. Hierarchies keep people. Hierarchy usually has those who are oppressed and those who are the oppressor. So you have to defeat the hierarchy. And in order to defeat hierarchy, you have to defeat the ideology which is being propounded, the cultural hegemony of this ruling elite. You have to defeat that by attacking these ideas and so on and so forth. And then eventually, as existentialists and a development in language called post-structuralism, which I'll get to in a bit, said that language itself encodes mindset of oppression, is actually encoded into language, right? So the idea that light is better than dark, the idea that right is better than left, or comes first and left, ladies, sorry, well, so ladies and gentlemen would be is a example where women come first, but they'll say that there's all these hidden biases and prejudices in language itself, which also is part of this controlling elite.
Yeah, what I'm getting here then is because of the failure of Marxist prediction or Karl Marx's predictions, the neo-Marxists they came with an idea, if you like, to say, look, in order to preserve this kind of communist worldview, we have to make something up, or we have to theorize that those who hold the power in a society, the ideologues, they have the power and the hierarchy to disseminate these ideas, to make the working class think that they're okay, to make the working class be happy with the status quo. Now, the neo-Marxists, therefore, from what you're saying, and just correct me if I'm wrong, are now using postmodernism as a tool to remove those hierarchies, to stop people thinking that capitalism is okay.
In essence, well, I suppose
because they're not the same thing, right?
Yeah, neo-Marxists, when many neo-Marxists embrace what would be now called post-structuralism and many such things, they actually morph into now what's called post-Marxists. Where they give up on the Marxist idea of a meta-narrative, the Marxist meta-narrative. Marxism wants Marxism to be the dominant ideology, but many of these post-structuralists say there should be no dominant ideology. But to kind of reorient it back to your question before I discuss these other details, so the neo-Marxists, one of the famous ones was Adorno. He basically said that one of the ways, in essence, to create this workers' revolution is you have to basically, obviously, destroy the hegemony of the ruling class. But in order to kind of accelerate that as well, you can use not just the working class as a marginalized group of people, but every marginalized group of people, or anyone who is not part of the dominant group or is not represented by the dominant group, or there exists any kind of preference against that for the dominant group, against those people, women, people who are not North European white or what have you. You can mobilize all these different minorities to join in that cause and attack this hierarchy from all these different groups all at the same time, and bring down the hierarchy. Now, here's the thing. So many Muslim academics who go into academia, because academia and the university is where these thinkers reside, mostly in the humanities. They've, in essence, have a strong showing, if not an over-preponderance control of humanities. Humanities being the study of sociology and society, because as most people don't realize, Karl Marx advanced his worldview as a economic system, political philosophy, and sociology all mixed into one, because for him they were all the same thing, by the way. And Marxism is a sociological theory or lens in sociology for people who want to be sociologists. Many sociologists are Marxists, and many neo-Marxists and many post-Marxists. So they gain a massive foothold in Western academia through in humanities departments, and then many Muslims who in the West are marginalized, or they feel the brunt of Islamophobia, or they might be discriminated against for other attributes they have. They might be South Asian, they might be from Africa, they might be from they might be Arab, they might be whomever, Turkish, it might be whomever. If they feel that they are marginalized and discriminated against, well, guess what? These post-Marxists or neo-Marxists, or those influenced by these movements, will come to them. Hey, you know what? We will fight for you. We're with you, and we want to defend your rights against these oppressors, these discriminators, and so on and so forth. So you know what? Join us, join our movement, and here's how we're going to take down this hierarchy together. And all you have to do is just adopt the values and ideas and the methodological tools that we're using to do that. And that's why many Muslims fall into that, because they think that the enemy of my enemy is my friend. But sometimes the enemy of my enemy is just another enemy.
And they could be a worse enemy. They could be a much worse enemy, to be honest, especially if you look into the future, the impact of these ideas the next 5, 10, 15 years, it could create a far greater destruction. Because, so coming back to that question that or the question I raised, I was trying to understand your point. So there is a distinction between the neo-Marxists and the post-modernists, but the neo-Marxists, because they want to remove that kind of hierarchical dominance and oppression, which is making people feel okay with the status quo, they're using these postmodernists, the postmodernist approach as a tool to try and remove that hierarchy.
Okay, I think the best way to give you delineation of neo-Marxist and post-Marxist and so on and so forth.
Because the reason being, because you did mention the Marxism, then Karl Marx made a prediction, his predictions failed, then the neo-Marxists came up with the idea that it's because of this dominant ideological hierarchy, this hegemony that is, duping people to believe in that everything is okay and this is how it's supposed to be and this is the status quo, because why aren't they uprising, right? So what they realized is they need to remove this hegemony, this ideological hierarchical hegemony. And so that's where the link is with the postmodernists, correct? Because the postmodernism, they're kind of, if I don't know if you know, even if they accept this terminology, but they have a metaphysic, a lens in order to understand reality. And they basically say, well, there is no objective reality. There is no absolute truth. It's only your truth in a particular context, historical, linguistic, and otherwise. And therefore, these hierarchies should not be dominant, and therefore they should collapse. So that's how maybe the neo-Marxists would use postmodernism as a tool or an approach to remove that hegemony in order for the predictions of Marx to come true, which is people are going to uprise and people are not going to accept the kind of capitalist status quo. That's what I got from you. Or is that totally wrong?
Okay, no, it's not. Just a very slight nuance on the matter, because it is quite chaotic. And
I know there's a lot here, bro. I'm like, whoa, there's so many concepts to juggle here.
Apologies. I mean, it's a big subject, but to simplify it in a way. So basically, Marxism in essence failed. Marxism was based on the concept of economic determinism, which is that culture, religion, society, social classes, everything, it just emerges epiphenomenally from the economic system. The only really physical thing is the economic system, and all this stuff is just like some kind of ghostly emission that comes from, it's called the superstructure. Right? So the economic system determines everything. It determines the religion, determines even the creed of the religion, it determines culture, determines art, determines everything. That was Karl Marx's idea, was fully economic determinist. And change can happen because the means of production changes over time as humans invent new tools and things like that. And then you get tension at society with a thesis, which is the current condition of society, meets antithesis, the new economic realities that are arising, and then it creates synthesis. So you get from feudalism to capitalism by the invention of the Industrial Revolution and all the technology that goes into that. That's basically Karl Marx's ideas. So his prediction was that the most developed Western economies who have full industrialization will then go to the next step, because he said we have enough resources for everyone on the planet to enjoy good food, good shelter, that you don't have to work so long, because industry does a lot of it for you. So he argued that maybe you'd only need to really work maybe, I don't know, 3 or 4 hours a day, maybe, for a few days a week, because industry takes care of all of it. So then you can be an artist, you can be a film buff, you can be a philosophizer, you can be a fisherman, and as well as working in a factory one day or working in an office all day. This was Karl Marx's idea of freedom, and this was his predictions from economic determinism. But when that didn't happen, it was kind of like a big refutation to Karl Marx. It was that,
yes,
guess what? England, the working class are actually quite happy. And not only that, but his prediction that profit margins would go up and wages would go down until the working class, as the bourgeois want to maximize profit as much as possible. So they're going to keep pushing down the wages of non-differentiated labor, i.e. from the workers who just go to factories, what have you. But instead, you had labor rights, you had welfare rights, you had dangerous conditions had to be taken care of by the employer, and new legislation protecting workers. All these things went against Karl Marx's predictions, right? That you had social welfare, it just went against Karl Marx's predictions. He didn't account for that, didn't predict it, thought it wouldn't occur. So how to explain it then? Do we just throw Karl Marx's books in the bin? Well, you should have. But what some Marxists did is they thought, well, you know what? Karl Marx isn't God, right? They don't even believe in God. He was partly right. We just need to tweak his worldview a little bit. So instead of economic determinism, they said that actually then it wasn't the economic system that creates the culture, but the culture and the ruling system is actually created by the ruling class, and it brainwashes the workers into thinking that they're in a happy condition.
It's like an ideological hegemony.
Yeah. As cultural hegemony, as
so far
by Gramsci,
so far I got that. So the point now, the link now between
that and the postmodernists,
these neo-Marxists, aren't they now using postmodernist thinking approach in order to remove this ideological cultural hegemony, which is preventing from Marxism to manifest itself in the real world, for everyone to have this kind of utopia, this freedom and this utopia, because that is what is keeping the masses dumb, if you like. They're keeping the masses happy with this status quo that is not good for them. It's actually oppressive, because according to the Marxist narrative, they're supposed to be uprising, right? So that my question here is, isn't the link that these neo-Marxists are using postmodernism now in order to remove this cultural hegemony?
Well, here's the irony of this, which is, so the neo-Marxists want to replace the dominant, the dominant hegemonial system of ideas it's called ideology. They called it ideology, or Karl Marx called it ideology, but they simply want to replace that with socialism and Marxism. That's all they want to do. They just want to just replace it with their own system.
But to get there, aren't they using postmodernism to do that? Postmodernism to do that?
Okay, so initially it was simply about breaking down hierarchies by critiquing the dominant ideology. So they developed something called critical theory.
Okay.
Which was simply about psychoanalyzing. They were influenced by Sigmund Freud, by the way. That's what also made neo-Marxists. They took these new theories on board and they started to use it. We need to psychoanalyze society. We need to psychoanalyze. We have to show people that they are subconsciously taking in ideas which have no basis in reality, or are false ideas that they've been told by the liberal ruling elite. And we need to refute it, expose it, refute it, show them it's wrong, and then they will wake up from their stupor, and so on and so forth. The problem with now they're doing all this, and there was to change the hegemony to the hegemony or the ruling by the tyranny of the proletariat. Make the proletariat, the workers, be the ones in control, and eventually make everyone into one class. And it'll be the hegemony of the ruling class, and the ruling class will now be the working classes. They wanted to replace the ruling system with their own ruling system to make it more simpler. Postmodernists are a little bit different because they're against all hegemonies and all they call it grand narratives or meta narratives.
Yes,
and the irony is that basically many neo-Marxists, once they did, they looked into the existentialism. They not looked into it, but the influence from existentialists, the influence from post-structuralism, which is about language is arbitrary and things like this, as this, which I'll discuss in a bit. But this basically, in a way, you could say, made them apostate from neo-Marxism, and that's why they're called post-Marxists. It's because, I mean, many of these famous postmodernist thinkers, Jean-Paul Sartre, you could Jacques Derrida, who else? That's kind of Barthes and many others, quite a few others. They were either influenced by Marxism, or they were well-known Marxist philosophers in their early life, or even till later life. These are all Marxists.
Okay, I get it now. I get it. So
Michel Foucault, that's not the one as well. Famous Foucault. So, these were all Marxists. They apostated, you could say, in a way, from Marxism.
So the link basically is not that they're using postmodernism as a tool to remove the hegemonical cultural, ideological hegemony and cultural, oppression of these masses, that they somehow are happy with the status quo. They're not using that. Is because in the attempt, using critical theory to remove that ideology, they somehow morphed into post-Marxist, and therefore morphed into now adopting a post-modernist worldview, if you want to call it that, which is antithetical to the postmodernist. I guess that's what they would argue. But they would have the post-modern lenses. So you're basically doing like the history of ideas. So there is a link between Marxism, the neo-Marxists, and the postmodernists, because a lot of the neo-Marxists became postmodernists. Yes. Okay, I get it. So it's okay. Good. Okay, I get it now. Good. So it was not necessarily the fact that you have neo-Marxists today that would ascribe to postmodernism. Would you? You wouldn't have that, would you?
And
if they do, they probably just do it as a
tool. No, the main ideas of it, no. But many of the critical tools, or the analytical tools, sorry, of which comes from postmodernism, or let's just say a particular branch of it called post-structuralism, which is about text, how you read texts, has influenced everyone so much now that, I mean, as I said, most of your viewers and everyone today, if you use the word narrative a lot, like we need to talk about narratives. This is from postmodernist thinkers. They popularized that using that term to refer to stories that are popular and are told and authoritative in society.
So one would argue then that there could be that some neo-Marxists can use some postmodernist thinking in the attempt, as a tool in the attempt to basically remove the cultural hegemony or the ideological hegemony that's based on some kind of hierarchy, of course, in order for the working class to rise up and realize that they should fulfill this Marxist dream. Yeah. Okay. So so it's good.
The minute a neo-Marxist says, you know what, there shouldn't be a ruling ideology anymore, they cease being neo-Marxist, and they then become, you could say, post-Marxist. As soon as they reject meta-narratives or any particular ruling system. In another way, the way to put a postmodernist forward to you is, in a way, they're kind of like a political existentialist, maybe be the best way of, maybe a way to better understand it. A political existentialist, that the true liberation of the individual from in society, from all narratives imposed upon them, from all authorities, whether it's linguistic authorities, whether it's morality authorities, worldview authorities, complete freedom and sovereignty of the individual against all these things in society, which means that there can't be one dominant culture in that society. That makes you, in a way, you could say, a post-Marxist.
Yeah, man, look, this is like the deification of man. That's what it is. They want man to be absolutely free, and he can never be absolutely free. This is a feature of divinity. Allah is Al-Ghani, He's As-Samad, He's the absolutely free, He is totally independent, self-subsisting. This is Shaitan's work, bro. This is Shaitan's work.
Do you know what? I'll just to highlight something, just so you understand it even better, was when you said he, when referring to man or like mankind, what have you, the postmodernist or the post-structuralists would simply say that you could have said she, right? But you picked he. And so, in essence, you've given a privilege to picking one particular descriptor or gender gender of a word, gendered word, over the other, which in your mind, in essence, they'll say that you give males more privilege than females, which is a narrative which has been inculcated in your mind and is part of the systems, part of the hierarchical structures that you were raised with, and you need to liberate yourself from, and it's socialistic, and that's in essence that the kind of arguments they will make from that basis. And of course, when you ask me about is there a good Quranic verse you could say that might respond, which is hierarchy is natural in the Quran. What does it say about this? It says that Allah has raised some people to above others to test them by what they've been given them.
Sure.
Whether they will be of service to other people, to paraphrase.
So we have social hierarchies too, like even with the family, like the role of the husband and the wife. There is an obvious hierarchy there. Yes, it's a complementarian system, but there is a form of a hierarchy. So
in Islam, but not for post-Marxist though, brother.
Yeah, for sure. Now, okay, because there's a lot here, bro. I think the next question, which is very important, is then let's focus on some key particular manifestations of postmodernism. What particular manifestations of postmodernism are most prominent now? Because I want to link this to critical race theory. I want to link this to how to avoid the kind of epistemic and metaphysical pitfalls or lizard holes, if you like. We don't want Muslims in, sharing Islam academically, intellectually, and we don't want, Muslims in general adopting these worldviews, these perspectives that are alien to the Islamic tradition. So I think the next question is important is, well, let's focus on key prominent manifestations of postmodernism, and then let's continue the conversation how to deal with them. And then I want to bring in critical race theory, inshallah. Yeah.
Okay. So the neo-Marxists, in their attempt to take down the man, the system, they argued. So Theodor Adorno and Horkheimer and Herbert Marcuse and many others, which were the neo-Marxists who set up what was called the Frankfurt School. They talked about the need to engage any minority or disenfranchised classification or grouping. So women, for example, people who have disabilities, anyone who is basically not what they deem to be the normal for that society, or the privileged group in that society, should be engaged. And in essence, if everyone was made culturally equal across the board, if everyone was made absolutely equal, and there was no differentiation between them, then what you would take down the system automatically, because then if the system has no hierarchy, then there is no more ruling bourgeois class anymore. Everyone becomes one class, right? So the working class is one group that the Marxists cared about the most, because that's their group. But they were going to use multiple different groups they're going to co-opt them, and they're going to use them to take down the same system. So they would view that if they can take down the patriarchy, a male-dominated system, and make women equal to men in all ways, this would get them closer to that absolute equality that they want, the one-class system of everyone's, the proletariat, for example. But that was their goal. Okay, so then how does it manifest? Well, now we know of, for example, feminism is one particular case. Now, feminism is really a term in the West. I suppose that the best translation I would say for feminism, if you'd like to really understand it, is because liberals can be feminists too, is feminism is simply women too, is the best way of putting it. So if you're a liberal, and when the liberals brought in liberalism, they first brought it only for men first. They said, like, men have these rights and they can vote. Well, men of a certain amount that owns a certain class, they have certain wealth and they have a certain class. But then eventually women should also be able to vote too. Women should also have these property rights too. That's what feminism was initially. So the socialists and Marxists and others, when they kind of try to invoke or get feminism co-opted for themselves, and there's now Marxist feminism, socialist feminism. Karl Marx argued that the family unit of the husband and the wife and so on is actually a microcosm of capitalist society. The way you have the bourgeois class, the men, getting free labor or enjoying or exploiting the labor of those subordinate to him in the family. So this was actually, Karl Marx is making an argument like this. So then the idea that women weren't working in having jobs or going out to in the factories and things like that. So the Marxists were like, we need to actually make women equal, that we should change the culture of society such that women will no longer financially depend on men. And if they don't depend on men, just like if the workers don't depend on the bourgeois, ultimately, the factory managers, but they can, own the means of production themselves, they'll be free. Likewise, if women had access to working in the factory and getting money for themselves, they would be free, because they would be free from depending on men as well. So this kind of idea that women could only be free truly if they were doing a 9-to-5 slog in the factory, like men were doing, or in reality it was maybe 9 to 8 because it was long hours back then. That somehow frees women is something that these neo-Marxists kind of push, and eventually the idea of the family structure was viewed as a microcosm of capitalism, and therefore the nuclear family, the traditional family, was to be discouraged as a norm. So they don't say it's wrong to do it, to have a traditional family. They say that it can't be normalized. They'll say we should promote every type of family structure, any arrangement of family, whether it's single mother or single father or two fathers or two mothers, whatever. We want to make it. There is no normal family, and so when they attacked the nuclear family, it wasn't to say we want to ban it or abolish it. No. They just wanted to make it morally equal to any other kind of family, even no family, right?
Because this will help them in the eventual destruction of any type of hierarchy.
Yes. Gender roles.
But this therefore is not only the postmodern, this is not only the neo-Marxist approach. This is the postmodernist approach too.
Yes. So
because they both want to remove hierarchy. The postmodernists want to remove hierarchy and these kind of structures in order to have their kind of, just allow the individual to be as free as they want. And which in reality he's not really free, because you mentioned earlier he's going to be a slave to his kind of shahawat, his blameworthy desires. Yeah. But the neo-Marxists wants to remove hierarchy because they want Marxism to manifest itself, and that can only happen if you remove the current hierarchy, because that's what's creating the cultural hegemony, which is preventing people from uprising. Correct?
Yeah.
So really, you have really intelligently, because I've listened to a few people talking about these concepts, and I haven't really understood it, but I think I'm getting it now. Jazakallah khair. So I know it's been messy, but yeah, it's been very, very transformative intellectually. So you could really summarize this by saying the neo-Marxists, they want to do what the postmodernists want to do, but their ends are different. For the neo-Marxist, he or she wants to remove the cultural hegemony, therefore the hierarchies, the structures, the hegemonical, you know what I mean? The
Greek word, bro.
Yeah, sorry, bro, I'm tongue twisted now. The hegemonic structures in society, because those are creating the cultural dominance and the cultural propaganda, if you like, an ideological propaganda that's keeping those working class people from uprising. So that's why they want to remove it, and that uprising would give you that Marxist utopia. But for the postmodernists, they want to achieve that, remove that hierarchy for their own reasons. And you've mentioned it before concerning there is no absolute truth, there's no mind independent values, no mind independent truth. Things are based on your own personal, historical, social, cultural, linguistic context, which is not truth as well, blah, 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 blah. So they will remove all of that in order for the individual to be as free as possible. So they're using this, okay, good. So they're both very dangerous then.
like the postmodernist, or you could say the post-Marxist, they want to create a cultural anarchy in a way, as in there is no one authority. Every individual is a culture unto themselves. And there is
what
no
I'm seeing
ruling
is,
system.
yeah, so
Whereas,
what I'm seeing is
the neo-Marxists want to destroy the existing hierarchy to replace it with a one-class
yes, get that. Okay, good.
domination.
So what I'm getting from here now is that the most prominent manifestation of neo-Marxism and postmodernism is really the destruction of hierarchy. And from an Islamic point of view, it's the destruction of our social political model. It's the destruction of the family. It's the destruction of the social model of Islam.
Yani, more than that, it's the destruction of the Arabic language. In its preeminent role, the postmodernists would argue
there's no more hermeneutics.
No. What they would say is they'll say that Islam engenders the cultural hegemony of Arabic culture. So they'll say that Islam is in a way the domination by Arabs over non-Arabs, because it gives privilege to the Arabic language over other languages, because of the fact it's the language of the Quran, the revelation itself.
Yeah, but this is why we have to be very careful. So when people in the da'wah, sharing and defending Islam academically, intellectually, when Muslims in the academic space, they need to really understand the dangers of these ideas.
Oh yeah. I mean, I can give you other examples. I've actually encountered Muslims who argue that Muslim civilization or Islamic civilization, it was anti-black, was racist. Now, yes, there were cases of ethnic preeminence of Arabs at one point, and then they were overturned by the Abbasid revolution because it was anti-Islamic. It was against Islam to do so, and also the fact that the Arabs weren't. It wasn't anti-black per se. It was at least the Umayyads anyway. It was more like pro-Arab against non-Arab, not against black, because they had slaves who were Slavs, East European Slavs, who were viewed to be inferior types of Bani Adam, inferior peoples, white East Europeans. Yeah, everyone forgets that the Arabs thought or at least the Umayyads anyway, maybe thought they were the more preeminent group of people, and a lot of these neo-Marxists, post-Marxists would if they were to apply the exact same methodology, and some have, to Islamic civilization history as well as Islam itself, they'll say that this is pro-Arab, it is Arab privilege, Arab supremacy, Arab superiority, and you can't, and this must be cut out of Islam. If the Muslims are to be liberated, it must be, this pro-Arabness must be cut out, right? And obviously we act aghast to this. And look, I'm, we're both, well, I'm Portuguese and you're Greek. We're not strictly Middle Eastern Arabs per se, although our ancestries have all kinds of mixes. Yes. But for us, ethnicity is irrelevant. It's the Quran came in it's going to come in some language. It's not going to come in gobbledygook. It has to come in language of existing people, of course. It doesn't matter if it's, it could be, I don't care if it was in Swahili, in Turkish, and in Mongolian, as long as Allah chooses whatever prophet he wants to send and to whatever people he wants to send it to, and whatever language that he wants to reveal his will in. And we accept that. It's irrelevant which...
and the meaning of that language can be understood with the language that you know. You may not know Arabic, but you can know the meaning of these words by virtue of translation. And the Islamic concepts and values and ideas are universal, and they can be translated at least in a simple form in any language. But the issue here is this: why is it the case, therefore, that some Muslim activists are adopting this, or some Muslims in academia are adopting this? Is it because they cannot see the Islamic solutions? They can't see what Allah is telling them, or what Allah expects from them in their current context? Because the whole idea of having taqwa, the whole idea of having iman, having God consciousness and having iman, is to ask yourself the question, what does Allah want from me? What is most pleasing to Allah in my particular context? So you have this da'i, you have this person who's sharing and defending Islam, you have this academic who's in the academy and he's Muslim, and all of these ideas are now coming to them, right? How do they now, obviously they feel that maybe neo-Marxism and postmodernism is a way to remove the hierarchy that's going to give the Muslim a sense of freedom, but they don't see where this is leading. And they may be genuine, it may come from a position of ikhlas, of sincerity, but the issue here is if they're adopting these alien worldviews, which are very easily understood to be extremely problematic, just what you've just described, bro, these are the most dangerous ideas for the Muslims, very dangerous, and they must be intellectually fought, yeah, because you're destroying key critical aspects of divine guidance: the political authority, the social authority, language itself, the understanding of the Quran, the understanding of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the understanding of truth itself, the understanding of morality, right? All of these things are totally decimated by virtue of these worldviews, these ideas, neo-Marxism, postmodernism. So, see, the key point I'm trying to raise here is, what do we give them as a replacement? They want tools, bro. The du'at want tools. People in academia want tools. Let's assume, and we should assume, and many are, let's assume they're sincere. They want these tools. But all they could see now is a dominant intellectual space of postmodernism and neo-Marxism, and they think they could use it to achieve a certain goal for them and the community, but they can't see where it's leading them. Well, what do we give them, bro?
Well, I mean, just to add to that, which is, these postmodernist and existentialist concepts from both neo-Marxism and post-Marxism majoritarily, they hold the ideas, for example, post-Marxism hold the idea there is no absolute interpretation of truth. So the Quran can be interpreted any which way you want, and that's equally valid. If you want to go, I mean, it needn't even be a non-contradictory interpretation. If some people say, I'm going to interpret the Quran, and some Muslims have said that they want to interpret the Quran in the way of justifying same-sex intercourse, for example. There's one particular feminist Muslim who argued that in some aspects of the Quran concerning gender roles and what have you, she says we have to learn to say no to the Quran at times.
What?
Say yes. Yeah, well, you know what, I'm going to just say it because this is factually what she says. So Amina Wadood was the individual in question, so that to say no to the Quran on some aspects of it, presumably concerning gender, because that's what she's involved much writing in. And also the idea that to say that there is kuffar, those who reject the truth are morally wrong for doing so and will be punished, will be challenged by his postmodernism, simply saying that how dare you impose your meta-narrative on other people's. That's your truth. Everyone's truth is equal. And it's not that you say, look, I have my truth, and lakum dinakum waliya din, to you your deen and your practice, your way of life. To me, my practice, my way of life. But I will believe that you're wrong. But I'm not going to physically force you to become Muslim. That's no longer sufficient. To merely say that your way of life is superior, is the truth, would be considered to be a type of microaggression, from using their terminology. In that you're now imposing, you're now restricting, you're now oppressing other people, even though you're not physically doing it, you're not forcing them, you're not hurting them, you're not insulting them.
But how do they run away from the idea that of their truth, that they also obviously have to believe in the truth, that there is no absolute truth? So how do they escape that?
Well, I mean, the contradiction, obviously, that's the funniest, that's the funny thing about the famous saying, is that there's no absolute truth. Absolutely, there's absolutely no absolute truth. Well, of course, it's a self-contradiction. But for them, they say it's irrelevant. It's irrelevant what individuals think is the truth to any other individual. Right? It's just irrelevant, right? So your interpretation of reality is your way. And there's no way you could ever convince another person to see reality the same way you see reality. So they say that truth is your truth. Okay. They also have terms like lived experience. So they'll say that, for example, if you produce a worldview, or you think you have an idea based on your experiences, they'll say that it is just your lived experience, and you can't really make someone else have a different lived experience, and so therefore you can't tell them to have a different conclusion about reality.
So how do we empower these academics, the Muslim du'at who want to share Islam academically and intellectually, to obviously realize how postmodernism and neo-Marxism is fundamentally problematic? So how do we empower them to recognize that and to give them an alternative from our tradition, bro? This is important. How do we do that? What do we do? What do we say to them?
Well, see, one of the problems of this is that the worst falsehoods are kind of sugar-coated in parts of truth. So basically, what you might call postmodernism or post-structuralism is dressed in the garb of respectability as a objective analytical tool. Even ironically, objective. How could it be objective if it says that everything's subjective? But anyway, it promises to give you hidden secret truths in cultural texts that you analyze. It's almost like, I call it the materialist Batiniya. You know, the Batiniya of the Muslim history, who they reckon they could claim, they could see a hidden esoteric truths in the Quran and Sunnah, which people wouldn't see clearly, but they say, oh, but you know, we can just show you that this is what it really means here, and so on and so forth. It gives you hidden truths. It promises hidden truths. It's very enticing to people who encounter Muslim academics who don't know any better, because it promises to help them with their analytical abilities and so on and so forth. So, for example, I'll just give you one example of this. So they'll say things like that the American political system was designed with the object of suppressing African Americans. That's what it was designed primarily to do: suppress African Americans. In fact, all Western systems are designed to give white people supremacy or what have you. But many of these political systems emerged at times before colonialism, before people even left the shores of their countries. And so these countries like England or Poland or Lithuania, what have you, they didn't really design systems with the idea of giving privilege to people of a particular skin color, right? But the argument is, oh, but this is it's assumed, it's a given from their worldview that they refer to their own people, and so well. Like, I just give an example. If that were true, there was a legal case, I believe it was in the 18th century, where there was a slave ship and it came to Plymouth in England before going off to North American colonies, and a slave from West Africa jumped off the ship and tried to escape into England, and obviously was captured. So there was a legal case because the slave owner wanted to have what he thought was his slave back, but there was an argument saying that, but does he count as a property of the slave, as property of the owner, according to the English legal system in England? And ultimately, it was found that no, there is no precedence in England for slavery in the law system, and therefore the slave was free to go, because he had escaped from the ship. And this way he got the famous saying that from that case was, no person may breathe the air of England, and anyone who breathes the air of England is free, right? Because that was a legal precedent, because they didn't have a law for slavery in England. It was for property rights in these colony territories, which is different legal jurisdiction. So that just gives you an example of how giving it like these hidden, these kind of hidden, the so-called promise of hidden narratives, which explain in almost conspiratorially what really is a haphazard historical phenomenon. I mean, yes, like slavery existed. Yes, slavery was justified, and it was justified by liberalism, by the way, and it was justified through a number of means. One of them being that slaves were prisoners of war. John Locke used that argument. Another one was that slaves don't deserve equal human rights because they weren't equally human. That was another justification that was given for slavery. These things are factually true. That happened in America. No one would disagree that it was factually the case that America initiated those two justifications to imprison human beings and force them into almost industrial-like conditions, a slavery of industrial-like conditions. But the idea that there was some kind of slavery was this deliberate system concocted by a particular race to enslave another race, it historically doesn't fit, unfortunately, human history, because the Romans took slaves, and they took slaves of all kinds of different ethnicities and so on and so forth. The Greeks took slaves of all kinds. The idea that the West somehow is especially white-centric, or not white-centric, sorry, but it's white supremacist as opposed to nationally supremacist or nationally.
Okay, good. So you're giving an example here of how some Muslim academics may have an affinity, right, a natural inclination towards neo-Marxist or post-modernist thinking, because it unpacks the kind of visible, lived oppression that Muslims and people of color face. And because a Muslim may have this very basic understanding of Islamic morality and say, yes, of course, we should defend the oppressors, defend the oppressed, rather. And that wasn't a Freudian slip. We should defend the oppressed and fight against the oppressors. They'll have that understanding, and they'll be driven maybe from a very basic Islamic moral basis. But then they'll adopt these ideologies to try and dismantle what they think is the system that produces this type of oppression and racism in historically and in the modern world. But what we've been uncovering in this conversation, that in actual fact, this is problematic, because the neo-Marxists want that Marxist utopia, and they want all hierarchy and cultural ideology to be destroyed in order to have the Marxist utopia. And then you have the postmodernists who want all hierarchy to be destroyed in order to have the individual to pursue their own perception of what it means to be free or absolutely free. And both of those ends are very problematic from a Islamic perspective, but they don't see it. They just see, they only see what's in front of their faces. They don't see the impact of these ideas. So, they need to be warned. But the thing is, I'm trying to get at this, bro, is what do they do then? Obviously, we would say to them they should follow the Quran and the Sunnah and the classical understanding of Islam. But that's sloganeering, bro. We don't want to have slogans here. We want to give them something. Specifics. Where do they go? Specifics. Maybe we should use, because this is linking to what you're saying about racism and about this kind of white supremacy. This links to critical race theory. Maybe use critical race theory, linking it to the postmodern discourse, and use it as an example of how people think, look, this is great. We're actually now fighting against the white oppressor, the colonizers. They messed us up from all the way from Bangladesh, India, Africa, all around the world. And, we're suffering from post-colonial trauma. It's because of the white man, right? Critical race theory is saying it's the white man. There's this inherent political sin, if you like.
That being so, post-colonial, they call it post-colonial theory when it applies to the Western colonization of the world. They call it post-colonial.
Okay, brilliant. So let's use critical race theory as an example of all of this, bro. I think this would really, it would be a good end as well, the end part of this podcast, to now tie in all of these ideas. So you've got this Muslim intellectual, more Muslim activist that wants to share and defend Islam academically and intellectually. You got this Muslim academic. They've bought into some of the kind of neo-Marxist postmodern ideas, because they think these hierarchies need to go because look, Muslims are going to get their sense of freedom and sense of identity back. And now let's use critical race theory as an example of them adopting these type of ideas, and let's show why it's wrong, what the implications are, why it's against the Islamic worldview, and what we should adopt in order to solve this problem.
Okay, so basically, many Muslim students, just not even academic, but students that go to universities, young people want to change the world for the better. They want to improve it. They want to do something. They want to find their place in it. Now, if Muslims tell the kids, don't get involved in Islamic activism, or stay away from movements or groups which are peaceful, but they are Islamically active, and they use Islamic politics and Islamic worldview and system. So if they keep them away from that, the kids are going to go to university, and they're going to be co-opted by people who say, we'll give you a system. You hate injustice? Great. We will define for you what justice and injustice is, and we'll give you the tools and will give you a movement to join for you to fight against it. And that's what will happen if you don't give them. There's a famous phrase the Christians say: "The devil makes work for idle hands," and that's what's happening now. So critical race theory, more specifically, and I'll use it to kind of highlight what I'm just saying. Now, first and foremost, there's two big caveats or disclaimers I must give, and I must be very, very clear about it, because the nature of these ideologies are, for example, if you criticize neo-Marxists or Marxists, they'll say, you support the bourgeois capitalists. All right? I say, no, I don't. I just don't think that your solution to the problem is going to work, and it will make things worse, probably. Likewise, if you criticize feminism, they say you're a misogynist, you hate women. I say, no, I don't. I just think that Islam gives better rights for men and women, and that it's not about gender anymore. It's about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who has no gender. But we are all under his agenda, right? So we must subscribe to that. So to this, I'll say this: the statistics of racism, the income disparity, the disparity of opportunity, the police brutality against African Americans or Black Americans, because the nomenclature has changed. This is not in dispute. We all agree with we can see these statistics. It's quite evident. Racism is rampant in the United States of America. There's racism in UK, racism in France, racism in all these countries. There is no dispute about the documented, observed statistics, observed phenomena. That's not where there's no dispute on these. We all accept it. Now the question is how to explain it and what's the solution. That's where we're going to have difference of opinion. Not that it exists, whether it exists or not. No, we all, anyone who's reasonable, would of course agree it exists, and it is endemic. It is an epidemic in these states. That's my first disclaimer. The second disclaimer is, I skipped my head now. I'll probably come to me in a sec. Anyway, that's at least the first disclaimer I must make absolutely clear. Oh yes, the second disclaimer is this. The other counter argument they use, because they don't understand anyone that comes from an Islamic perspective, even Muslims, unfortunately. So they'll say, "Oh, you support the conservatives, or you support Jordan Peterson randomly because or you support the mainstream liberals, or the bourgeois capitalists." We'll say no, because we criticize them. We started criticizing them first, actually. You yourself, you started debating, mainstream liberalism. One of the first to do so in the UK, and many others followed afterwards. So we refute them. We're not conservative, which is an Enlightenment school of thought, which is where, long story short, basically, it still believes in individualism and liberal values, but it believes that traditional institutions are what is required to keep a stable society, to enjoy your individual freedom. Long story short, we don't believe that as Muslims, right? The Prophet Muhammad wasn't a conservative. He didn't conserve the traditions of the pagan Arabs. Yeah, some of it was from Ibrahim and survived. Okay, a lot of it was added on later. They're not to be conserved. He was for change. So as Muslims, we change what is munkar, and we call to what is ma'ruf. And if the ma'ruf is new for these people at any point in time, so be it. We'll be bringing new things. Right, although they're their original religion, but they're not new. But anyway, we change what we have to change. We keep what we have to keep according to the criteria, the Furqan of the Deen. Anyway, so yeah, I've criticized Jordan Peterson on a blog and so on and so forth, and many Muslims obviously has engaged him and discussed with him. Ironically, Jordan Peterson is influenced by Nietzsche, funnily enough, but that's a different discussion. Anyway, those two disclaimers aside, critical race theory is emerged from neo-Marxist discourse. Some would say it's heavily influenced. It's not necessarily post-Marxist, but you can be a post-Marxist and be using critical race theory, or you can be not post-Marxist or not postmodern and use critical race theory. You don't have to be a postmodernist per se, but it's heavily involved. So what does it say? And basically is this. So the Marxists made their view of society all about the working class as the oppressed class against the proletariat. And they explained all social phenomena as a fight between the bourgeois and the working class. So then you had these feminisms that arose, that critical gender studies and what have you, that said, no, they didn't discard that. They simply said, oh, and there's also a battle, a binary, which is also, funnily, a postmodernist no-no, a binary between the patriarchy, the ruling male class, and women who are the oppressed class. And critical race theory says, actually, our lens is the binary between the white supremacy and the marginalized minorities, which could either be African Americans or Black Americans or Hispanics or whomever. So these two. That's critical race theory. It's involved in it is both a drive to change that as well as to explain it. So it would explain racism as simply the active suppression and maintenance of the system by the white supremacy, and it tries to explain things like the civil rights movements and the changes that came up with the civil rights, which actually it eliminated segregation in the southern states of America. The northern states didn't have segregation, but the southern states did after the Civil War, and explains the emancipation of African Americans or Black Americans from slavery simply as it was an economic necessity designed to make Black Americans, African Americans feel free, but secretly they were going to be even more oppressed than before. All right, that's one of the tenets of critical race theory. It says that racism is part of the structure of American society and all Western government society. It's actually part of they call it structural racism, not institutional racism, structural racism, which ironically came from the Marxists. They were the first to use that term, structural racist, which comes from Marxist understanding of a structure that arises from the economic system. And so the solutions to this, they say it could be caused by the wealth inequality. So if the African Americans or Black Americans are not owning an equal proportion of the resources in America, the economic disparity will lead to will create social domination against Blacks or African Americans, or they'll say that in order to have true social justice, you need to have reparations for slavery and redistribution of the wealth to the African Americans or Black Americans. And now feminists will say redistribution of wealth to make equal between males and females. And of course, the proper Marxists will say, and some neo-Marxists will say simply the redistribution of wealth from the bourgeois make it equal to the proletariat. So everyone has the same kind of wealth, more or less. So you see the same solutions and similar analysis is used by neo-Marxists and by critical gender studies people or critical race theory and so on and so forth. But the difference is that the Marxists will actually criticize critical race theory, saying, look, we think that racism can be explained as something between the dynamic of the bourgeois and the class warfare. We can use our model to explain it, whereas critical race theorists say, no, our model explains it, which is it's actually a fight between races, not a fight between classes, right? That's where you get the divergent opinions between the two. So Marxists will criticize critical race theories will criticize Marxists, even though they have sometimes very similar ideas that they link to each other. Now, postmodernist critical race theorists will say that language itself encodes racism. So if you say that darkness and light, darkness is bad, lightness or light is good. So the terminology used in the Quran, by the way, from darkness to light, yeah. They'll say that encodes a racism, that dark is bad and light is good, and that gives you subconsciously the idea that Black people are bad and are inferior to white people. They will make that kind of argument, and they could then level that against the Quran itself and say that the Quran itself actually has these tropes, even though the idea of darkness and light is a well-known Semitic trope from all the Abrahamic religions, going up to almost even the Sumerians. The idea that it's not about skin color, it's about the fact that if there's no light, you can't see where you're going, you're blinded effectively. And isn't it good to see what's happening around, to see reality around you? So that's where it comes from. But they could argue, no, it secretly encodes white supremacy in those binary descriptions of lightness being better than darkness. So critical race theory will argue that any time the American government or any Western government makes any laws that bans racism, bans racial hate, it's secretly hiding its racism. It's secretly exploiting the minority to make them even more oppressed. But by making them think that there's no more racism, but secretly there is racism going on. So they'll say it's all insidious, it's all a hidden plan, it's almost like a conspiracy theory. And look, here's the thing. Look, we're no big fans of liberalism, but liberals do believe, at least today, that racism is bad, and they are against it, and they're against racial hate. And they're going to implement policies against it. They're not going to implement wealth redistribution policies, just like take money from the rich or take money from any old white person based on their race and give it to people of a different race, because that's liberalism can't do that, because that would be racist according to liberalism's own view. But critical race theorists will say, no, that's what we call white fragility. That's where white people, where as soon as you ask them to do something that will redress the inequality in society, and remove their privilege, they get all defensive about it, what have you. And you say, no, it's not white fragility. It's just liberals can't justify that from their own worldview, right? They don't, that you can take money from people based on race. They can't justify that. They find it difficult. They can't. So the problem with critical race theory, not that in areas where, because many Muslims who will know some of this stuff, and they'll say, look, Abdullah, what is wrong with simply believing that the West is coordinated to be white supremacist, right? I mean, surely that's not haram. Like, it's not against Islam to believe that there's a white supremacist conspiracy deliberately sewn in. I said, look, no, it's not haram per se if you want to take just that element of critical race theory, and that's not the only element it has, by the way. But it obscures your ability to analyze reality itself. Because we have a better explanation. Ibn Khaldun has better explanation for this, which is you can explain not just racism in America or in any nation state, but from the Islamic perspective, but throughout history, asabiya and kibr, right? The idea that you give privilege,
nationalism and arrogance,
nationalism or tribalism, or like my in-group is like better, or I'm going to give them privilege than other groups, and kibr, arrogance, right? And I'm going to give you an example, and which will be pertinent to your background, but not to you, which is the ancient Greeks, right? So the ancient Greeks, we had this interesting narrative about how they view themselves in the world relative to the barbarians. They thought that the ones to the north of them, so basically white Europeans, those to the north of them, were basically just really passionate, but didn't have intellect. They were like just savages, basically. And that in the south, in Egypt, they were very intellectual, very clever, because of course they were clever, very advanced civilization, but they were very cold. They didn't have passion, right? So the Greeks were the perfect mix, right, of both passion and intellect, right? That's how they viewed themselves. Yeah. I see no denial from Hamza on that. Just a curious silence. So,
it is what it is, bro. It is what it is.
Some of my Egyptian friends used to tell me that Egyptians are very passionate. So it's funny that ancient Greeks would describe Egyptians as being cold and calculating. Right? Yeah. So anyway. But my point is that historically, I mean, even to ancient China, the ancient Chinese would call themselves the Middle Kingdom. Everyone else are like the barbarians. Every race or ethnicity or even tribe thought they were the best, and everyone else was not as good as them, kibr, or they would privilege themselves over other people, as the famous Bedouin saying, me against my brother, me and my brother against my cousin, me and my brother and my cousin against the stranger. Okay. We can explain it from a human phenomena of jahiliyyah, of ignorance, without guided by revelation. Here's how humans act. Look, in India, you have oppression against Muslims, even though they are of the same ethnicities as those, and same language as those around them. But it's because now Hinduism is being created into a national group, and there's a discrimination, there's lack of job opportunities, there's violence, there's police brutality, all the same phenomenon that you see. And I'll end my point with this absurdity I noticed. Someone tried to apply critical race theory in modern day South Africa to explain the racism between South Africans and Mozambicans who came in as immigrants to South Africa. Mozambicans speak Portuguese, and South Africans, they speak a variety of their own languages, but they also speak English as the official language. And so, because you have these different language speakers, even though they're not from a very distant part of the world from themselves, and they're not white, or there's no white, but simply by the difference of that language, Portuguese and English, they view them as different. They view them as foreigners. There's violence against Mozambicans living in South Africa, discrimination, racism, and so on and so forth. And I read a paper on this by a critical race theorist who tried to explain it as residual white supremacy that resides in the hearts of the previously subjugated people of the South African people themselves.
Oh my God!
It's like, no, I can think of a simpler explanation: Occam's razor. So anyway. So critical race theory, I've written some articles about it on my blog, but the founder...
At this stage, I just want to put a link up here just to promote a course that you're doing with the Quran Institute. People, please go to thequran.institute/FEMCRT. You can see the link here, or if you're listening to this, then go to thequran.institute/FEMCRT. Because Ustad Abdullah is going to be expanding on some of these very complicated topics and concepts that he's been introducing today. And the main point of this, one of the main points of this of these type of podcasts is for you to continue your intellectual journey. So you could access the speakers, go on their websites, attend their courses in order for you to unpack and understand and internalize these ideas even further, in order for you to basically share Islam, internalize Islam, and defend Islam as well, and help others to do so the same. So don't think this is like, a 2-hour podcast that's going to give you everything on these topics, because there's been a few names that even Abdullah has mentioned that I don't think I've ever heard of. So it's a lot of reading for me as well. But yeah, so please everyone go to thequran.institute/FEMCRT, and please just Google Abdullah Al-Andalusi and look at his website. There's lots of articles there. In actual fact, I've benefited from his articles, specifically the one concerning hell, the problem of hell, dealing with that issue, and others as well. And he is a reference, alhamdulillah. So please explore his work and please attend this course as well. I wanted to mention this clearly. And I'm going to be putting this on the YouTube description below as well, in order for you guys to be able to access it more easily. So CRT, see, my problem with what you're saying so far, I agree with you, by the way, is why, okay, maybe that's a big question, but why is it that activists, academics, Muslim thinkers, people who want to defend Sharia Islam, they adopt worldviews that are seemingly alien to the tradition in order to solve problems that Muslims or even human beings are facing? Isn't the whole point of the Furqan, you mentioned the Furqan, the differentiator, which is the Quran, the whole point of divine guidance, the whole point of the prophetic sunnah, the prophetic way of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, isn't that the whole point? Wasn't that revealed to us in order to guide our current affairs and individual affairs as well? Why is it this kind of almost constant pattern of some kind of ideological inferiority complex, that we have to adopt things that are being used in academia as if the academy is this objective source of reality, which is not true at all? There's so many epistemic biases, metaphysical falsities permeating academy. I know, I'm a PhD student, and I was asked to do some review of some Orientalist articles and other articles, and you could just see this filtered everywhere. It's filtered. It's not filtered. It permeates academic discourse, all of these false epistemic biases and metaphysical falsities, I like to call them. Why are we in this situation? Why can't we just go to the Quran and the prophetic teachings and the understanding of the scholars and use a robust methodology to derive answers in order to solve our current problems? Because you did it very simply. You just said it's asabiyah, it's tribalism, it's kibr, it's ego. Who solves these problems? What solves these problems? It's Islam, it's Tawheed. It's affirming the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's worshipping Allah. It's understanding who Allah is and who you are in relation to Allah. We've lost the dawah dynamic on this issue. and we've almost secularized our dawah discourse. Yeah, let's use CRT because it's achieving a goal that we like as well, even though it could be used against us in the future. Yeah, let's use postmodernism because it's removing the hierarchies that are oppressing the Muslims and Islam, right, and the Islamic community. And let's just use it for now. But then they'll realize in the next 10, 15, 20 years, we're going to have a generation of Muslims that may not even be Muslim anymore just by virtue of what they believe and their worldview. This is so critical, bro. To the point is we need another couple of podcasts just to unpack some of these issues, because this was just like, I just felt it was like there's a lot, right? There's so much more to unpack, and I'm definitely going to have you back. But the point here is, so yeah, address what I'm saying. Address my passion here.
Well, that's because you're Greek, of course. That's where.
Yeah, there you go. Absolutely. We break plates at weddings.
Yeah. All right. So let me break it down. If not doing it with plates. So basically, what you say is true, and it's due to a lack of confidence in Islam, a lack of knowledge about the Islamic solution. Many Muslims think that if you're in the West, the West don't want to hear about Islam in dealing with these problems they have. So instead, you have to just use their own things. So, for example, if you want to argue that Muslims should have rights, then the left will say, then you need to join us and go on LGBTQ relationship promotion platforms that promote these relationships as equal to heteronormative relations, i.e., the different sex marriage, the same the nuclear family, all this stuff, because if you want Muslim rights to be protected against conservatives and liberals who are enforcing X, Y, and Z against Muslims, then you have to. It would be hypocritical if you didn't also want it for other people. It's a false dichotomy, by the way, because what Muslims want is, like, we don't want to be like shot and killed just for being Muslim, and no one's saying that if someone has certain feelings for the same sex, what have you, that they should be shot and killed in the street. No one's saying that. So simply, Muslims, we don't want to be arrested arbitrarily. We don't want to be interfered with in our religious life, and that's it. It doesn't mean now that you now have to create a new subcategory of rights called transgender rights or LGBTQ rights. We'll be happy with just simply saying, look, you have rights for all the human citizens of the state. Be consistent with those rights with all human citizens. They can't be arbitrarily arrested. They can't be just killed or shot by law enforcement or by FBI coming to their house for a voluntary interview, which happened once where Muslims were shot, even though he accepted the FBI to come and speak to him voluntarily in his own house, and he ended up being shot. And the FBI said, "Oh, he was attacking me." So we just want the basic rights offered to all citizens in any of these states, right? And that's it. We don't have to go out of, we shouldn't have to go out of our way to advocate for specialist rights given to whatever subcategories are created for us now to be given basic human respect and rights, or at least consistent treatment. That's basically it. Anyway, so many Muslims, they fall into that, and they will go on all various platforms feeling obliged to do so. Many ISOCs or MSAs have contacted me and said, "Look, what do we do? We've been supported by this left-wing movement or group or what have you, but now they're demanding that we have to go on a platform supporting something we don't actually agree with." Yeah. What about the abortion debate as well? Now, many Muslim women I've seen in the United States of America are arguing that that abortion should be legalized for cases which don't concern medical problems. So if the person's totally healthy and fine, and in cases not involving rape, but at the discretion and desire of the woman, even up to the third trimester.
What?
Yes, even up to the third trimester.
That's murder.
But they argue purely on the basis that of the individualistic idea of every person is the ultimate owner of their body, even though we didn't create ourselves.
Well, the interesting thing is, one part of an aspect of the oneness of the divine is the oneness of his creative power, which is the fact that he owns everything. You don't own yourself, right? No. This is the problem with using a brother's terminology, ideologically infected. This is an ideologically molested human being, but it's true. let's just be very honest, because remember, everything links back, bro, to Allah. As you said, God-centric, right? Who is Allah? Who are we in relation to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? How we must relate to him? What does Allah tell us in the Quran and the Sunnah in order to on how to understand ourselves in the world? That perspective of that, whoever sister who said it's fine to do that based on an individualistic perspective of we think we have full ownership of of ourselves. This is someone who categorically does not understand some elements of the oneness of Allah and who they are as a human being, and basic scriptural divine guidance of how we should live our lives and how we should understand ourselves. And so this is like so important to keep on talking about these topics, bro.
And as I said, to kind of to answer that your question in perhaps in with more brevity, is that Muslims need to actually learn about how Islam solves problems of mankind itself, economic problems, with a detailed solutions, not just with no riba, no interest, but it's a bit more than that. It's more elaborate on that. I did lectures on, I think you can see them online, about economic system, how Islam solves the problems. You've done lectures on how Islam solves social problems, issues in the family, how it organizes it, and many more besides that as well. And many du'at have done so. And we need to obviously redouble our efforts to get it out there. But basically, because Muslims lack that knowledge, they're not confident about articulating Islam. We're meant to be witnesses to mankind, al-nas, right, to all mankind, for the deen of Islam, for the truth. In the West, when they have a problem of racism, for example, we should, instead of be going to CRT or some Muslims are actually even follow liberalism and deny racism. So liberalism is a perfect system. There's conservative Muslims in the Republican Party, which is ridiculous. So instead of all that, we say, look, you will never get rid of racism as long as you have the idea of a nation state, a state that represents a particular nation, because that nation nation meaning ethnic or linguistic group, because that nation will always be given privilege. And if you have more immigration, there'll always be the majority group, or the group that the nation represents their interests, because the state is meant to represent the interest of the group, in the democracy, the majority. They will always hate immigration. They'll always be worried about minorities. They'll say these will change our culture, as if every individual born in the majority group has some kind of birthright to determine the culture of the society more than anybody else does. Whereas in Islam, we say, you know what? We solve it. We don't make it about humans. We make it about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It becomes completely irrelevant who the majority or the minority is, because the creator of the tribe of Adam alayhi salam, which is our group, and the Ummah, we're all the same in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, except those who are pious and have taqwa, righteous, and those who are sinners and transgressors. You can choose your social status, so to speak, in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You can choose your status, your maqam, without needing wealth, without needing things given to you. You can choose it. Everyone can choose it. You're truly free to be the worshipper you want to be. All right, yes. the one who acknowledges the truth of reality. You can do your extra sunnah, you can do extra charity, you can help your neighbor more than you have to if you want, or just do the minimum.
I think they would argue here though that you have to therefore adopt a particular philosophical worldview in order for that even to make sense. But I think I could just preempt your answer is, well, you have to adopt the secular worldview in order for that to work as well at the same time. So you have to adopt ideas, you have to adopt a worldview, and that's why ideas are so significant, and that's why it's extremely important to continue unpacking things like neo-Marxism, post-modernism, CRT, and to get Muslims to realize that ideas are so significant, not only from a perspective of solution, but a perspective of your whole life, and also the perspective of our discussion today. Because if people start adopting neo-Marxism and post-modernism in the way that you've described it, and to do it and to adopt it in an instrumental way, because they believe it might be a kind of means to a particular ends, that we as minorities become a little bit more emancipated. It's very shallow thinking, because all the hierarchy is going to be destroyed, including Islam, the Islamic hierarchy, the social model.
They already have. I've already encountered Muslims who turn up against Islam and say, Islam is colonial, because look how the caliphate under Abu Bakr and Umar anhum spread, or how even the Prophet Muhammad spread the authority of Medina to the Arabian Peninsula, to other tribes. So is this not colonialism? Does this mean that if you're going to condemn colonialism as simply a political expansion, and that's wrong, because one people can't be enforced on other people's, quote unquote, then Islam would be wrong, even though technically that's not what Islam did anyway. Islam never forced people to change their political system, or how they, how each community lived, its laws and so on and so forth, which liberalism did do. But there was political expansion. Or they'll say, what about Islamic slavery, quote unquote? If you're going to condemn Western slavery, they'll say, then why did the Prophet Muhammad didn't abolish it himself? I say, well, actually, you know what? Islam, limited slavery to certain aspects, prisons of war and so on and so forth. But the treatment of slaves or servants is vastly different, such that it's not the very concept of servitude of peoples who are prisoners of war, because the Geneva Convention allows you to make prisoner of war do work. By the way, everyone forgets that. The Third Geneva Convention. So it's not that, it's that the Western idea of slavery, how it was practiced, that was bad. That's what we condemn. What they did, how they did it, the lack of rights of the slave, and how they even got them in the first place. That was what.
I would even use the word slavery anyway, because it has the wrong kind of connotations. It's a different, it's a different paradigm. It's a different paradigm that needs to be unpacked maybe for another podcast. But
so the course, like the course called the Race and Gender course, and other left-wing ideologies, and it's going to be a much more detailed unpacking of all these things. There's so much more I could have said, and I glossed over so much. I didn't talk about structuralism and post-structuralism as much, even though that's actually very important to what made neo-Marxists become post-Marxist. But we can discuss it in another podcast. Of course, I'm more happy.
Absolutely.
But that's what the course is designed for: is to equip all du'at and anyone, even just Muslims who are interested, or those who are scholars, or those who are imams, to understand what the West, its history, its intellectual history of this, its history of how it dealt with race, it's the racism of its past, the emergence of fascism and nationalism, and all these how these factors interplay, as well as critical race theory, critical gender studies, the various waves of feminism. All this is unpacked into great detail, and the Islamic perspective is supplied in much more detail. So that's
for sure. I mean, the role of these podcasts is just to give platform to these ideas so people could continue. If anything, if they've got anything from this podcast, is that they should understand that there is something problematic from a conceptual and philosophical point of view concerning post-modernism and neo-Marxism, and that if you follow the kind of logical implication of adopting the destruction of cultural hegemony and hierarchy, then that's going to end up destroying Islam. So you shouldn't use it just as an instrument to a particular short-term goal. You need to look a little bit further. And you also need to understand that you shouldn't fall for the false epistemic biases and metaphysical falsities of other philosophies, approaches, or worldviews. And you should come to the Islamic tradition and seek scholarly guidance to apply it in our contemporary times in a way that could provide solutions from the Islamic basis. Because number one, it would be consistent. Number two, it would be only khair, only goodness for you as an individual, for the Muslim community, and for humanity itself. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent this Quran to take us out of the darkness, into the light of Allah's guidance. So it's very important, brothers and sisters, that we take some of these ideas. You attend Ustad Abdullah's course, the Quran.institute/FemCRT. Go to his website, go to his other courses, and start developing the kind of Islamic worldview. Because Islam is not a religion from a kind of secular perspective. It's a worldview. It's based on the truth, and from this truth emanates laws, values, morals, ethics that are only going to be the best thing for not only us individually, but for the whole of humanity. So it's very important to.
And just lastly, in case people say, okay, we should be witnesses to mankind, but what about day-to-day issues where Muslims are mistreated by the police or what have you? Again, the principles of justice that Muslims believe in when dealing with non-Muslims, because the Quran says, do not dispute the people of the book unless you witness them committing injustice. We don't mean by that, in that verse, that they're not following the Quran, because obviously they're not going to follow the Quran, they're people of the book, the Christians and Jews. Yes. In this case, it means that when they're being inconsistent with their own principles. So in the West, if everyone is meant to be, let's say, if everyone has the right to an attorney, if everyone has a right to a court, to be brought in the court and to face their charges, and if one Western country starts arresting Muslims and not giving them a court case, we can't say, look, in the name of liberalism, give us our rights. No, we simply say, you believe in these principles. Why aren't you consistent with the principles that you hold to? So that's also a way we can argue. But at the same time, we should also say that you will ultimately never solve the problems in your society effectively because you lack the adherence to the revelation. The only way to solve it is by fulfilling the purpose of all human beings as prescribed by the Creator, who gives us the only guidance to solve human nature that we do have, by the way, for those existentialists. So that's it.
Good. Jazakallah khair, bro. May Allah bless you. Jazakallah for spending nearly 2.5 hours with me. It's been a huge pleasure and an honor for you to be here, and you have so much to offer the community, and we're always supportive of your work, and we share your stuff, alhamdulillah, and we've mentioned you many times on our lives as well, I believe. So keep on doing the great work. Anything that we can as a collective, as Sapience, can support you, let me know. Anything that I can do individually to support you, let me know. Inshallah, inshallah, I'm hopefully trying to self-define myself as the person that if you do reach out and you need anything, I'll be at your service. Let's hope that we can continue that, and that's a leadership style that we need in the Dawah community now. If the du'at and organizations come to each other and they're like-minded, that they need help, we should not even think twice and be at their service. So yeah, bro, I'm at your service. Anything you need, let me know.
I can come at 2 a.m. to your house to ask for a cup of sugar.
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing is, bro, we definitely need you back. We definitely need you back because there's so much more to unpack. Maybe just take one idea and unpack the whole thing. But I think this was a good introduction. It's gonna get people thinking, which is needed. And you may get some positive comments on your Twitter, and you may get some pro-CRT, pro-Marxist, post-modern
guys. A lot of comments from those, yeah.
Engaging. But I know you deal with them really well, and it's sometimes it's a joy just watching it. But yes, but I leave you with the last word. Give the audience the last few sentences, and then we'll close, inshallah.
Well, I simply say, like, barakallah feekum, brother, for inviting me, and for your patience, your Greek Stoic patience, and hearing me go on and on about a very big subject. But I'd just like to say that, as I said, the offer is also reciprocated for you, any other brothers at Sapience Institute and beyond. We as Muslims, we're here for each other. We're one ummah. We're like, teeth in a comb. We support each other. We're like bricks that's linked together, supporting up the roof. And as I said, it's a learning experience. We're always learning new things, and I'm still learning new things. And anything which I've said has been true and accurate has been from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the mistakes have been completely mine and abundantly mine. So barakallah feekum, brother, once again, and inshallah I look forward to doing this again on a different topic.
Inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.